Today we're going to talk about the role of artifacts in archaeological research. Anthropologists study what it means to be human. The primary object of that study is human culture. Human culture is what makes human beings unique. Culture is defined as all of the socially acquired knowledge, beliefs, arts, customs, habits, and identities of a people. At most fundamental level, archaeology is the study of how the physical world interacts with culture. We use the term material culture to refer to aspects of the physical world which play a role in a culture. Material culture ranges from ball courts to buildings, from fires to fields, from orchards to objects being transported. A subset of material culture that is of particular concern to archaeologists are items which we call artifacts. Artifacts are defined as any object which has been used or intentionally modified by humans. Artifacts can be modern or ancient. The cookware in your kitchen are artifacts. This hand axe, which may be over 1 million years old, is also an artifact. Stone tools like this one are probably the most durable items ever made by human beings. The oldest ones are about 3 million years old. Artifacts tell us a lot about how people actually live in the world, as opposed to how they think they live. So the study of material culture extends from the present to the distant past, from current cultures to long extinct cultures. Anthropologists who study material culture are called archaeologists because of their primary goal is to understand past cultures. For convenience, we arbitrarily refer to artifacts as belonging to one of two broad groups: those that had largely occurred in time frames before oral or written history in any given area, and those that occur in later periods. We can know a bit more about the roles of the latter by referring to descriptions of their uses. But for items belonging to time beyond memory, we have to infer the roles. Here today, I would like to introduce a few of the major classes of artifacts that prehistorians would work with around the world. I'm just going to show a few examples of each one to give you an idea of the range of material culture that we deal with on a typical basis on an archaeological site. Obviously, every one of these classes of material culture would occupy an entire semester of instruction and many months of analysis. So we're just going to show some of the basic aspects of them. Before we get started in the first class, which would be stone tools, I think it'd be useful to show some of the items that were used to produce stone tools, because these are often overlooked in the archaeological record. What we have here is a series of items which are used to manufacture flake stone tools. At the top we have an antler baton, and here we have an antler pressure flaker. Here we have a smaller antler baton, a hammerstone, and an abrader. Now, in the long history of stone tools, many of them, at least the earliest ones, were made by simply using hammerstones. Hammerstones are objects or rocks that are used to strike another piece of rock, which we call the core, to produce something called a flake, which is the piece that's knocked off of it. Now, hammerstones come in many different sizes, shapes, and consistencies, and oftentimes they were selected according to the stone that you're working at the time. But they are the oldest of all of the stone tool manufacturing items. For many millions of years, they were the primary tool used to make stone tools. Later on, we had the introduction of what we call soft hammer percussion, which utilized antler batons like this one or like this one. They were used to strike flakes off of the cores and produce more control and better shapes that were useful to the individuals who were manufacturing the tools. Lastly, historically, we saw the invention of pressure flaking, where an item like this would be used to push flakes off of the edge of a stone tool, to sharpen it, to shape it into a more fine and refined form. So these technologies and techniques were learned over millions of years and were passed on from generation to generation. The way that they're combined together within a particular culture is something that is an aspect of that cultural tradition, that we can trace through the archaeological record. Now let's look at a few examples of cores, which are the items from which the flakes are struck. Now cores come in many shapes and sizes and materials. Most important aspect of a core is it's made out of a material, a cryptocrystalline material, that is easy to detach pieces from, and that we can control when the pieces are being detached. The cores I'm showing you here are largely made of obsidian, which is a volcanic glass, which occurs in various parts of the world and is highly prized by ancient people. However, it's fairly rare. Folks would use the kinds of stone which they had available in their locality. Now, I'm showing you these to just give you an example of a range of types of cores. Cores are classified according to their shape and the direction from which flakes are taken. For example, this particular core would be a unifacial core. We call it that because flakes are being driven off one direction, unidirectionally, from one platform, like this. A core like this one would be called a bifacial core for the fact that it's had flakes taken off both sides. Here's another unidirectional, unifacial core. And these particular cores, this one and this one, are called blade cores. Now, blade cores are particularly interesting because they are specifically set up to remove long, thin flakes. The skill to do this was rare, and in the case of this one from Mesoamerica, involved highly specialized craftspeople. The advantage of having a core like this is that you can get much more in terms of efficiency from the core and long, thin blades and cutting edges than you could if you're simply making flakes. Now, cores oftentimes would be processed into artifacts themselves. The flakes that came off of these are actually the most valuable aspect of flint knapping. They produce very sharp edges that can be used for all sorts of things. It's not necessarily the case that removing these flakes is designed to produce a finished product. The flakes themselves might be the finished product that we're looking for. So look at some examples here coming up of flakes. These particular flakes are mostly from our local area. The materials that they're representing is not nearly so fine as the obsidian I showed you in the previous example. Nonetheless, all of these flakes have very sharp cutting edges that are suitable for any particular task that you might want to use them for. The earliest stone tools are actually sharp flakes that were driven off of cores and used for butchering and for making wood tools and bone tools. And for all of human history, up until the advent of metal tools, these would be the primary tools that people would use for their day-to-day living. So any reduction of a core produces hundreds of these. Some of them are selected and some are discarded, and it's the pattern in which these are made and used and left behind that tells us about the people's objectives and the use of their tools and how their material culture is being cycled through their daily lives. Here on this side, you can see an example of a particular flake, which is a blade. This is an Upper Paleolithic blade core. You can see how long this flake is in relation to its width. And so this was made on a very specialized core. The rest of these are more or less generalized flakes, but they all have the same properties. Properties we can see in this very large obsidian flake. The outside of the flake has dorsal scars. The inside of the flake has a bulb of percussion, an aurelian scar, and a platform. You can see ripples, which show the lines of force as it's being detached. We look for all of these landmarks to determine if this was actually made by humans or was accidentally produced by nature. Now, flakes, as I noted, can be used by themselves, and often were, for whatever task that came to hand, and then they would be discarded. But they can also be shaped into finer tools. To do this, you would need to utilize your batons, or perhaps your pressure flakers. These all happen to be bifacial tools. This one was made off of a large core, as was this one, but these are made off of flakes. This utilizes both flint knapping and grinding to produce a sharp edge. So these are finished tools that can be used from the debitage, is the term that we use for the material that's come off of a core. And the debitage can be converted into any shapes or sizes of items that you might need to use. This is the technology all of our ancestors used world over up until the advent of metal tools. Now, the form and shape of each of these is culturally determined. People learned how to make these at the feet of their elders. They also produce soft objects such as bone and wood in which these fit, and so those aren't preserved, handles and such. And so the study of these tools tells us a lot about the way people view their world, how they're utilizing the material aspects of the world, and in many cases it's the only thing we have that survives from their culture. Now, this represents what we call flake stone tools. But there are other kinds of stone tools which are produced in a different manner. This would include ground stone tools. Ground stone tools are exactly what we say they are. They're items which are produced by grinding the surface of a stone to produce the shape that we're interested in. I have here just a few examples of ground stone tools. These are matates, or hand stones, used for grinding grain. This one is highly shaped, and you can see that it has these very finely worked sides that would fit into a large metate, or grinding stone. This is more typical. It started out as a large granitic cobble. This is a handstone, or a mono. In North America, we call them that. And the entire surface has been ground off from use, also in a metate, or a grinding stone, which are too large to display here. But we can see a fragment of one of them here. You can see the concave surface of this grinding stone, which would have been rubbed by the hand stones, the items, the grain and the acorns, or what other items were being used, would be ground there. Another group of ground stone tools, or artifacts I should say, would be bowls. So this is the rim fragment of a large stone bowl. The entire vessel might have been as large as maybe 12 inches to 14 inches in diameter, and we don't know how deep, but the whole thing was formed through pecking and grinding and used as a mortar. Lastly, we have an example here of a maul, which would be a pounding tool. And you can see here that it's been ground so that it could be hafted upon a handle. The edges here has been broken off in prehistory, but we can still see that the formed aspect of this tool is present. These are all examples, including this pestle, which would be used in a mortar, of the range of ground stone tools we might find on an archaeological site. So, flake lithic tools, ground stone tools, are some of the most durable items that we will find on archaeological sites around the world. We find many other organic materials. An example might be shell. I'll just show a few items here. We often find a lot of shellfish in coastal sites around the world, including San Diego. So some of the shell will be utilized and made into tools. Most of it represents cooking and eating debris, but they tell us a lot about the ecology of the region and the foodways of the people who were living here. So shellfish species and size change with time, especially during the Holocene. And so these are important lines of evidence in reconstructing the ecology and the lives of the people of this region. Now, another set of items we can look at, which are rarely found in an archaeological context, are bone. Many of the items that we see here, the stone tools, for example, are actually used to create wooden and bone objects. Now, these very seldom survive. So we have evidence of use wear on the stone tools, which give us indications that they were using it to make the bone and the wooden tools, which do not survive in the archaeological record. Now, this represents the basic major classes of items that we would find in a prehistoric context, extending back indefinitely into prehistory. Historic contexts where we have better preservation and we have more detailed understanding of the material culture of the peoples that we're studying represents an entire additional class of artifacts that we can examine going forward. And these extend all the way up into the modern era with manufactured goods and in the classical periods in the old world. So I hope this gives you a general overview of the kinds of items that we would find on a prehistoric archaeological site in the Americas, particularly in the Southwest. What was not mentioned here today was ceramics, which is an entire discussion unto itself, and we'll leave that for another time.